All right, now it's time for us to move over to the back end now that we took care of our Redux on the front end. All right, so here what we're going to do first is we're going to start working on our server.js file. So let's go ahead and pull this up. Here, this is a filters action function that we created from the last video. So this function right here, we're going to be calling inside our home component later on, and or in this video, as a matter of fact, towards the end of the video when we do the testing. All right, so this action function here is going to make our API requests here. If you look over here, we're making a Axios request, a GET request to this endpoint, which is sending back two queries, a sort by and the limit. All right, so going to the back end here inside our server.js, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this and paste. And I'm just going to change this starting route from API product to API filter, because again, looking at this front end API request, we see that it starts at API. It starts is API filter, and then we have our queries made thereafter. So API filter here for the backend, and then that's going to be, we're going to point that to a file within filter routes, and I'm going to rename this. Oh, actually, why am I doing that? That was a mistake. All right, so I'm just going to copy this here, paste below, and then call this filter routes. And inside our routes folder, we're going to create a file called filter.js. All right, so that's it for our server.js file to start the receiving of this front-end endpoint. So now let's go to our routes, and let's see. Yeah, we're going to create a new file called filter.js. So what I'm going to do here is inside my routes, I'm going to pull up another file for product, and I'm going to copy everything here, paste inside my filter routes file. I'm going to close this back up. All right, because I'm not going to retype everything when we can make use of a lot of things that were from the previous routes folder. So I'm going to make use of Express, have retrieve the router from the Express router, and then I don't need this authenticate, at least for now. This uploads, don't need this, and then I'm going to change this. We're going to be calling a filter controller. We haven't set that up, but we will, and that will be inside of controllers and a file called filter.js, and we'll create that shortly. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to delete this, and I'm going to delete everything, all these routes except for this one here, and I'll keep this. It's going to be a GET request, and I'm going to keep this the same, and we're going to point to filter controller, which will have a method that will call what was it, new arrivals? Yeah, get new arrivals. Yes, that's good. All right, so that's it for our router. All right, next is we're gonna have to generate this controller here for the filter. So now, and as a matter of fact, let me start marking these off. So we took care of the backend server, right? Adding the initial route, and then the backend router, we just got done with that just now. Next step is moving on to the controller. Okay, so I'm gonna collapse this routes folder, and here inside our controllers, I'm gonna create another file and call it filter.js. Okay, and what I'll do is I'll open up another controller within our controllers folder, and I'll open up the product, because I'm going to copy all this here and then close it and then paste it inside our filter controller. What I'm going to do is, let's see, we're going to be using the product mode model, so we'll keep that. We're not going to be making a request to the file system. Let's see, we can delete this create. This is the one I'm going to be keeping, so but everything else I'm going to delete. So I'm going to delete this here for update, and then for the delete. Okay, so this I'll call get new arrivals. All right, I'm naming it this because inside the filter routes, that's what I call it here, get new arrivals. All right, so it's get new arrivals, and it's going to be asynchronous, which gets past the request and response. I'm gonna delete. Let me just delete all this here and delete this inside, everything inside our try block. And for the catch, if there's an error, we're gonna do get new arrivals controller, or I should say filter controller, filter controller get new arrivals error, and then we'll send the error of please try again later. All right, so now let's start here. So inside our controller, the first thing we're going to do is remember that in our front end get new arrivals action function, we're making that Axios request, and we're passing in two queries to be sent off to the backend, the sort by and limit. That's exactly what I want to pull or retrieve from the front end inside our controller. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the sort by query, and the way I'm going to grab that is inside this request object. We can do request query and then the name of the query. So I called it sort by. That was the first query that we called here in the action function. So it has to be the exact name that we have here. So it has to be spelled like this. And then the next one has to be spelled like this if we're gonna pull out the queries from the front end. So that's what I did here. It's called exactly the same. All right, so if request query sort by, if that exists, then do request query sort by and store it into our variable sort by. Otherwise, by default, we'll set it the default, and it'll be sort by descending. And we also set it by default in the front end, the action function method, but this is just another protection. So we're just setting by default descending. All right, so the other query is limit, and similar to what we did above, we're going to do request query and then limit. If that exists, then request query dot limit. Otherwise, by default, when it's set to 3. All right, now for this limit, currently right now, if I was to console log this out, this is gonna be the type of it is gonna be in a string, so it's gonna be in string format. But we're gonna get an error with the database if we send it, or if we make that query with a string value. So we have to turn this into an integer or into an int value. And so the way we're gonna do that is I'm gonna use parse int, wrap that around this here, and also parse int around this default value as well. All right. All right. So make sure you take care of that, that you parse and these the limit value. Otherwise, you're going to see an error. All right. So now that that limit is an integer value, we can proceed. All right. So now we can move on to the try block. All right. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to start making our request to the database, and I'm going to store. We'll make this request to the database, and it sends us over the data. We're going to store it into a variable called new arrivals. All right, so now we're going to make our request, await product dot find to find all the products, all the products, but then we're going to do some filtering. And the first one is we're going to use a method called sort, and this is going to take an object with an object, and the first what we're going to pass here into our object is created at, because when we sort is, remember in the previous video I said that inside the database the way we're going to make this new arrivals work is we're going to have to sort it by this property here in the database, which you see is created at, and this is the property that we're saying here to sort by inside the sort method, is to use that property in the database called created at. And as a value, we want to pass it as the value. You can either pass either descending or ascending order for this sort method. Now we already have this that we're passing from the front end, and it's stored in sort by, which is either going to be descending or ascending order. So right now we pass the sort by with the value that we have stored here in the sort by, which will be descending. Okay, so now that we got that, now the next thing is to also do a limit. So pass in limit, which inside will pass the limit. So this is going to allow us to filter even more and to limit the amount of files or documents that we return back to the front end. So instead of returning all the products, it's going to limit us to how much this variable has coming from the front end, which should be 3 by default, but we could also manually change it if we wanted to in the front end, or when we make use of that function, the action function. All right, so again, we're sorting by this created at property, and it's going to be in descending order, which allows us to make that the new arrivals feature. And we're also going to limit the amount of documents or the amount of products returned to the front end. So it'll be a limit of 3. So the 3 most recent products will be returned to the front end. Okay, so that's it for that. And then now we're going to start sending back this to the front end. So we do response JSON, and we're going to have a property where we're going to send over this new arrivals right here, which is this here. All right. So whatever we get from the database is going to be stored in new arrivals here, and now we're sending it as a response to the front end over here. And if you remember, just to refresh your memory, I mentioned in a previous video that where was it at? Here in the action function, I said so in the get new arrivals action function, we make dispatch here of get new arrivals, where we're getting this response here, which is whatever the data is coming from the database or from the back end is going to be returning back to this and stored here in this response variable. And then here we make this Redux dispatch request, which calls a type of get new arrivals and the response data and then new arrivals. And this new arrivals has to match exactly what's coming from the backend's controller over here, new arrivals, and that's what we're sending back as a response. Okay, so that's it for that. Let's mark this. So now we're done with the backend controller. And now let's go ahead and we can start some testing. Okay, so now we took care of everything we needed to start our test. So to test action function in the home component. So now let's go ahead and open up. Let's see. Let me go to the front end and go to components and open up our home component. All right. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna first let's import our action function from React, let's see, we gotta go back one directory, going to Redux, going to actions, and then go to filters actions. And that action function that we called was called get new arrivals. So go back to the home page, get new arrivals. All right, so now we imported our get new arrivals action function into our home page. Next, we also want to import a few things from React Redux. So what I want to import from React Redux are two things. The first thing is use dispatch and use selector. So use dispatch is going to allow us to dispatch this get new arrivals function, and this use selector is going to allow us to pull out or to pluck out data from our Redux store. And finally, we're also going to import use effect from React. Use effect, because as soon as this component mounts at the very beginning, we're gonna want to dispatch this get new arrivals function. All right, so now let's go ahead and move inside this component, and let's store our dispatch inside this variable, call it and store it inside the dispatch. And let's see, next, let's go ahead and use our use effect. Okay, and here we're gonna now dispatch our get new arrivals function or action function. And again, remember this get new arrivals function, action function, takes in 2 arguments. By default, we set it to descending and limit of 3. But if we wanted to, we could change it. We can change it to something else. I could also change the limit to 5 if I wanted to, or 6 to return 6. And that I could do it over here where I'm calling this get new arrivals method. But I'm going to leave this empty here. I'm not going to pass anything else inside because I'm using the default values, which is descending and also a limit of 3. Okay. And finally here, for dependencies, pass in dispatch. Now, we're going to use our use selector. Let's see, const. Oops. And then I'm going to do use selector. Gets a state. And then I'm going to do state dot filters, I believe. Let me go back to, let me open up my Redux store here. And what do we call it? Yes, it was filters, plural. Okay, close up this. So it is state and then filters. And then what I want to extract from there is our new arrivals, the data inside our new arrivals array, which is inside. If we look at the reducers for filter reducers, I'm referring to this here. So that's what I'm extracting from our Redux store, which should be an array with all of our data. Okay. All right. So now that we have that, save that. And finally, we're going to, I'm going to do a break, no, add a horizontal row here. And below that, I am going to finally see if our testing works and do json.stringify and call our new arrivals, which is here. All right. So we're pulling it where I'm trying to see if the new arrivals displays on our front end using json.stringify. So if I save that, let's see here. There you go. All right. You see this data here? There you go. So this right here is the data that's being returned to us in the order, or in being sorted in descending order, which allows us to have that new arrivals feature. And I know it's you can't read this now, but just know that also remember we had a limit of 3. So this right here is actually displaying us a total of 3 items. Okay, and I know currently in the database we do have only 3 items. I'm actually going to be adding more later on to work with. Okay, but this is working right now. We did the test and it's showing that all of our items are being shown to us on the front end, and it's sorted. And now we can make use that data to be displayed to us on the front end nicely. Okay, but that's it for now. I'll see you in the next lecture.